The OpenAI API can be quick and easy to learn. We'll show you how. A powerful example is generating text output from a prompt, similar to what you experience with ChatGPT. We start by creating an OpenAI client, which will let us interact with the API. Here, we use the client to create a response by specifying the model and giving it a prompt to generate text. Finally, we output the generated text from the model to the console. Now let's try it with Python. First, we create an OpenAI client that lets us interact with the API. We then generate a response from the GPT-5 model, providing a prompt that asks for a one-sentence bedtime story about a unicorn. Finally, we print the text output generated by the model. Here is the bash example using curl to call the OpenAI API and generate text from a model. This section sets the model and input prompt as part of the request data. Analyzing images and files is another powerful feature of the API. You can analyze images or files by sending URLs, uploaded files, or PDF documents to the model for tasks like extracting text, classifying content, or detecting visual elements. Let's see how to analyze the content of an image using the OpenAI API with JavaScript. First, we import the OpenAI library and create a new client instance. Next, we send a request to the API, specifying the model and the input data. Here, the input includes both a text prompt and an image URL, allowing the model to analyze the image. Finally, we print the model's output, which provides an analysis of the image content. This code shows how to use curl to send a request to the OpenAI API for image analysis. Here in the first lines, we specify the API endpoint URL and add the necessary content type and authorization headers. In the data section, we define the model and construct the input, combining both a text prompt and an image URL for the model to analyze. Within the input, we set the user's role and specify two content items, the text question and the image link. Let's look at how to analyze an image with the OpenAI API using Python. First, we import the OpenAI library and create a client instance. Next, we use the client to create a response by sending both text and an image as input to the model. Here, the model is specified as GPT-5, and the input is provided as a list containing a user message. In the content array, we include a text question for the model, as well as an image URL. Finally, the model's response is printed, which will contain analysis of the image based on the question provided. Let's look at how to analyze the contents of a file via a URL using the OpenAI API with curl. The request sends a model name and an input that will be explained in the following blocks. Inside the input array, we define a user message with its content. The content includes a text prompt asking for a summary of the key points from the letter. Next, we add an input of type input file that points to the PDF file URL we want to analyze. This JavaScript example shows how to send a file for analysis using the OpenAI API by referencing a publicly available PDF document and requesting a summary of its key points. The highlighted lines specify the type as an input file and provide the URL of the PDF document to be analyzed. Finally, the response from the API is printed, which will contain the model's summary of the document's key points. Now let's look at how you can analyze a file using the OpenAI API in Python. We start by importing the OpenAI library and initializing the client. Next, we create a response request where we specify the model and provide an input array with both a text instruction and a file URL to analyze. Within the input array, we see the user's instruction and the type set to input file with the file URL provided. Finally, printing response.output text will show the model's summary of the key points from the provided document. Now let's see how to upload a file to the OpenAI API using curl. This curl command uploads a PDF file to the API for later use, specifying the purpose as user data. Next, we'll use that uploaded file as input to generate a response from the model. In this second command, the input includes both a reference to the uploaded file's ID and a question for the model to answer. The actual question for the model is placed alongside the file reference, asking for specific information contained in the uploaded PDF. Let's see how to upload a file and use it with the OpenAI API in JavaScript. First, we import the required modules and initialize the OpenAI client. Next, we upload the PDF file using the client and assign the returned file information to a constant. Now we create a response request where the input includes both the uploaded file's ID and a question about the file's content. Finally, we print the generated response to the console. Now let's see how to upload a file and ask questions about its content using the Python SDK. First, we use the OpenAI client to upload our file by reading it in binary mode and setting its purpose. Once the file is uploaded, we generate a response by specifying both the file's ID and our text question in the input. Notice that the prompt asks specifically for the first dragon in the book, paired with the uploaded file input. Finally, we print out the model's extracted answer from the file. Now let's see how the model can be extended with additional tools. You can enhance the model's capabilities by connecting external data sources or custom functions as tools, such as web search or integrating third-party systems. The next section will demonstrate how to integrate web search capabilities into a model response. This code block demonstrates how to enable web search as a tool to enhance a model's responses. The input prompt asks the model to provide a positive news story from today, utilizing the web search tool for up-to-date information. Finally, we print the model's output, which should include information from a recent positive news story. Let's look at how to use a web search tool with the OpenAI API in Python. We start by importing the OpenAI library and creating a client. Here, we create a response using the GPT-5 model and enable the web search preview tool to answer a question about current events. Finally, we print out the model's generated text result. This curl command demonstrates how to make a web search request using the OpenAI API and the web search preview tool. Here the prompt asks for a positive news story from today, utilizing real-time web search capabilities. We begin this example by importing the OpenAI library and initializing a client for API interaction. Next, we create a response using the client, specifying the model, input question, and attaching the file search tool with a specific vector store ID. Finally, we print the response to view the output from the API. Let's see how to perform a file search using the OpenAI API in JavaScript by specifying a vector store of your files. We create a new OpenAI client instance to interact with the API. Here, we send a prompt to the response.create method, asking about deep research by OpenAI and specifying the file search tool. This section defines the tool's parameter, where we indicate the use of the file search tool and specify which file vector store to search using its ID. Finally, we log the API's response to the console for further review or processing. We define a tool called getWeather for the model to call, specifying its parameters and description. We send a request to the GPT model along with the provided user input and the tool's array. Finally, we print the model's detailed output, which would show if and how the function tool was invoked. Let's look at how to define and use a custom function tool in the OpenAI API with Python. We begin by importing the OpenAI library and creating a client instance. We next define our function tool as a dictionary, specifying its type as function and giving it a name and description. For the tool parameters, we set their type to object and provide detailed property requirements, such as location as a string. We mark the location property as required and enforce strict input with no additional parameters allowed. We then call the responses.create method on the client, providing the model, input message, and the tool's parameter with our function definition. Finally, we print the API response by converting the first output to JSON. This curl command sends a post request to the OpenAI API to call a custom function for weather information. Here, the input specifies the user's request asking about the weather in Paris today. Now let's look at the tools object, which defines the function the model can call. The type, name, and description fields describe the function's purpose for the model. The parameters field defines the format of input arguments, requiring a location string such as a city and country. The required and strict fields ensure the model provides all needed details and follows the schema precisely. This curl command demonstrates how to call a remote MCP server using the OpenAI API. Here we specify the MCP server type, its label, URL, and that no manual approval is required for requests. Finally, we send a question about supported transport protocols in the MCP spec as the input to the request. Here we set up a JavaScript example for calling a remote MCP server using the OpenAI API. We create a new response specifying the MCP tool and providing details like the server label, URL, and approval settings. The input we send asks about the transport protocols supported in the 2025 MCP specification. Finally, we print the generated response to the console. First, we import the OpenAI library and initialize the client needed to make requests to the API. We create a response by specifying the model version, the tool type as MCP, the remote server details, and the input question. Finally, we print the output text from the response received from the MCP server. Next, we'll explore how to stream API responses and enable real-time applications. The OpenAI API also lets you stream responses in real time using server-sent events, or leverage the Realtime API for interactive and multimodal apps. Here, we set up the OpenAI client and prepare to request a streamed response from the API. The request asks GPT-5 to repeat a phrase quickly, and the stream parameter enables real-time streaming of the output. We now loop through each event in the stream, logging responses as they arrive in real time. We start by creating a client instance and preparing our streaming completion request. Here we call the responses_create method with the stream parameter set to true, allowing us to receive incremental results as they're generated. To process the real-time stream, we loop over each event and print it as soon as it arrives. Let's explore how to create intelligent agents using the OpenAI API. The OpenAI platform allows you to build agents that can take actions on behalf of your users, such as controlling computers or orchestrating back-end logic with the Agents SDK for Python or TypeScript. Let's start by defining a Spanish language agent that is instructed to speak only Spanish. Next, we define an English language agent that only communicates in English. Now we define a triage agent that hands off requests to either the Spanish or English agent based on the input language. Finally, we run the triage agent on a Spanish input and output the final result. First, we create a Spanish-speaking agent by specifying its name and instruction. Next, we define an English-speaking agent with a similar approach. We then set up a triage agent that can hand off requests based on language to either the Spanish or English agent. In the asynchronous main function, the triage agent processes input and prints the final output. The script runs the main function if it is executed directly.